Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovon. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness. And Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. Great. So today we are doing a book review on an amazing book I read recently called Crucial Conversations. And Donovan has read it quite a while ago, but I'm relatively new to it, although some of the concepts I've heard before, but I really like how they kind of break it down with a lot of different tools. So Donovan, what do you remember from the book, or what would you like to touch on to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, it has been quite a few years, so I'll be a little bit rusty. I might actually have you go first, and then I'll jump in and see what pieces I can remember, because I may just end up talking about general conversation and negotiation things that may or may not be in the book, because I can't remember where I got them. So I'll let you lead.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed the book. I did the audio book version, which is really only, 6.5 hours, I think. And why I thought it was important, actually, I did it with my partner. I kind of had been nudging him to do it for months now, but it was kind of the result of a crucial conversation. And basically the background of the crucial conversation is that, most day-to-day conversations are fine and they're not necessarily crucial. There's no moment of something critical could happen. It could go really where emotions are heightened, and then you don't necessarily say the thing that you probably should be saying in those high-end emotional states, or things like, maybe saying a comment or something critical of your boss. That's kind of a crucial conversation, because that could go poorly and result in, retaliation or something negative to you, making it a crucial conversation. Or another example from the book that they use was when nurses notice maybe like the physicians or doctors making a mistake, they're kind of not necessarily inclined to point that mistake out, which is dangerous and could be literally deadly, because, they were afraid to confront the doctor to point out the mistake, because they could, have negative repercussions because of that. And resultantly that could end up, in someone's death potentially. So that's where, like, critical conversations, where it's like, how do you have those difficult conversations without, offending that person or making them upset at you? So navigating through that. And, I feel like I'm a pretty good, strong communicator, but even I know when I'm triggered or agitated, it's a lot harder to communicate in those moments. So it's not a matter of like having the skills, but it's just like, how do you do it when you're like really emotional and triggered, or you feel like you're getting attacked? How do you handle that? So any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I remember from it a little bit, is basically like, there are these certain conversations or interactions that need a little bit softer touch, or we need to employ a little bit more skills. It's not like you show up at work and people are like, hey, how was your weekend? Like, it's not those conversations. It's the ones like, oh man, like I really want to, I don't know, like a raise or something, right? And like these conversations that generally make people pretty nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I remember, and I could be mixing resources at this point, but there's just like steps in there, a couple different like, little systems or whatever to approach these types of conversations,
Mm-hmm.
different tools that you can use. And then, like you were saying, making sure you're in the right mindset, because there's a lot of books and resources that kind of have really specific tools. Like if they say this type of thing, say this type of thing back. And if I recall correctly, Crucial Conversations was a lot more like high level, like this is the general strategy. Like you want to make sure that you stay in a position of like, what is it that you're trying to get together? Like what is the shared vision or the shared outcome that you want, and the specific way that you get there is less important than kind of navigating through it together.
Right. Yeah, no, that is a really big point in the book, is about, instead of focusing on, because a lot of times in these difficult conversations, we're very positional. We're like, my opinion is correct. And it's like, how can you even like think of something otherwise? And this is where me and my partner get into conflict sometimes, because we're very like self-righteous in our position, and like my position is the right one, obviously. And one of the tools that they suggest is like, think about like, what is it that I really want? Do I really want to be in a conflict right now? Not usually. Is this really that important to me? And then also, what do I want for the other person, the other party? And then if that's not sufficient, also coming to like that mutual goal, like what do I want for us? And that's where you can create together, instead of win-win or win-lose, which is how most people are thinking about it. It's like, how do we both win in the situation?
Yeah, one of the big things, and I don't remember if it's from this book, it might be, but one of the big things that shifted my mindset was realizing that there is almost always some other third path that's better.
Mm-hmm.
Like almost all the time, at least for me, when I get into a conversation or a negotiation that gets kind of like heated, it's because, like you're saying, we just sit in these positions when there is really a way better place if we just sidestepped a little bit. So I think this isn't like a super crucial one, but something that comes to mind is like negotiating for a new job. And like, I remember one of the jobs that I got an offer for, I thought, oh, well, I want this amount of money. And the reply was, we can't give you that amount. And so at first I was like, oh, this sucks. Like, I'm out. Like,
Okay, yeah.
no deal. But then after I calmed down a little bit and started thinking about like other options, I'm like, well, I mean, if they were willing to give stock options or something else or more time off or some other things, like all I want is more value. It doesn't have to be dollars. And like that to me is the big shift from kind of this position of like, I need X salary. And there may be certain situations where that like would actually be true, but what I really wanted in that case was just more value. Like that amount of money with no other perks didn't seem like enough for what I was looking for. And I think there's all kinds of scenarios where this kind of third path can open up, or this other, like you were saying, once you figure out like what it is you really want and step back and get up to a more high level point of view, you can see other positions that would just be equally useful than the one you start from.
Absolutely. I really like that you had mentioned the value piece, because that kind of correlates to some of the other aspects of the book. Is like, what was important to you is to feel like it didn't have to be the dollars, it's having to feel like you were valued. And another point that they make is like, does the other party feel like they're being respected? Because if you're being all like snippy about it and being like, you're wrong, then they're probably not feeling respected. And the other part of that, not just being respected, but feeling safe, is like, does that other person feel safe? And when I notice myself getting agitated and the other person getting agitated, I'm like, okay, clearly I'm doing something that's not helping the situation. What do I need to say? Obviously, I need to like calm down my tone. I need to not be like accusatory and be more inquisitive, and just be like, oh, I'm sorry, I did not realize maybe I'm not making you feel comfortable, or, really like stepping back from my agitation and really being like, this person is clearly not feeling safe. So what do I need to say to have him feel, or her feel, safe and respected? And that kind of makes me rethink of like, okay, how can I de-escalate the situation quickly? And that's one of the ways I think that has been successful.
Yeah, I can't recall if it's from this book or from some other resource, but I also saw a huge difference in kind of what you're saying in terms of creating the right environment to keep the conversation alive. And it sometimes feels like a little bit too much, but when I get into these more crucial conversations, I find myself very often kind of putting a placeholder out in front or like some sort of statement to get my intentions across before I ever even get close to putting out my position. So saying like, hey, I want to make sure that we both come away with something we're happy with. I want to make sure that you feel respected. And like sometimes it feels like I'm just like, oh my gosh, over the top, like blah, 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 blah. But I've never had like a really terrible response where someone's like, stop telling me that you value what I'm going to say. Like no one ever responds that way. It's just me kind of feeling a little bit weird about like all of this. But the other piece is every time that I do that compared to times where I forget to do something like that, the conversation, the outcomes are drastically different. Like I've never been in that state of mind and started from the right place and started from like okay, this is probably we're going to probably have to navigate a little bit. We're probably going to have to work through some stuff. Mm-hmm. I want to make sure we both come away with something that we feel good about. Here's where I'm starting from, but I'm here to listen to what you also have to say.
Right.
Those go so much better.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, it makes a big difference if you kind of create the context of the conversation offhand. Oh, and that just kind of reminded me of another point that the book had mentioned of not just like allowing the person to feel safe and respected, but to actually view them as like, even though you may think their ideas or whatever, or their reasoning is illogical or doesn't make sense, but actually come from a place of like, if this was a reasonable, logical, intelligent person, you know, and I treated them that way instead of like this crazy maniac, how would that shift the conversation in a way? So that kind of is being like, you know, if I can believe like this person isn't actually trying to cause ill will towards me or not trying to be like a crazy maniac, then it kind of shifts it being like, okay, I do know this person. And it kind of it depends on the context. For people I do know, like most of the time they are not trying to be hurtful or whatever. But if it's like a random stranger, I'm also going to try to assume that they're not trying to be intentionally hurtful and being like, you know, maybe they're just kind of acting out because they had a really shitty day. So yeah, and to not take that personally.
Yeah, I had I don't know, I must have read it somewhere, but a slight realization change a while ago that no one ever really does anything in the moment unless they think it's the right thing to do, right? Like, you don't ever, I mean, very, very rarely do you do something like, oh, this is like absolutely terrible, I shouldn't do this. Like most of the time you have some reason you think it's right. And me trying to step into that space of like, why do they think this is the right thing to do? Even if I totally disagree with it, even if it's something completely off, like you were saying, it seems illogical to me. I mean, it could even be that they have ill intent, right? Like even people that have ill intent toward me, it's helped me a little bit to try to step into that space of why does this person think that the right thing to do is treat me this way or be aggressive towards me or whatever else. And a lot of times, you know, it'll chain into something like, oh, well, they're feeling threatened right now. That's why they're being aggressive towards me. And it's like, okay, that doesn't make it awesome. It doesn't make me be like, wow, thanks. But it does help get a little bit of perspective on it. And it does help open up a little bit more space for me to get back into that kind of context setting, get back into cooling things down instead of like, this person is just being super aggressive towards me. What, you want to fight? Like, okay, let's go. Like, I can step back a little bit and be like, okay, why do they think that? All right. So let's try to shift this away from something that feels threatening or shift this away from, you know, whatever the underlying reason they think it's right could be. And then not always right, not 100%, doesn't make the interaction immediately awesome, but it does open up a little space.
Yeah, no, definitely. And to just, you know, open up the conversation, it just kind of reminded me of another example in the book that he talked about was a story of this woman that was upset that her coworker seemed to be like trying to show her up all the time, when in reality, so she was feeling like he's trying to show her up and minimize herself at work. And in reality, what actually was happening was like he was thinking she was overwhelmed with a lot and he was trying to like help her out with that. But she kind of took it as like, you don't think I'm good enough to handle my job, so how dare you try to like outshine me or at work, and you're always trying to do that kind of a thing. And it kind of goes back to, you know, other points we've made in previous episodes of, you know, how do we separate out the story? Like a lot of people create stories in their head that's not really the reality of the situation, or they think their perspective is like the reality of what's happening. This person's trying to offend me and show me up, and how dare he, when in reality they might just be trying to be helpful. Who knows? Yeah. So
yeah, it really goes back to creating assumptions like we've talked about before. And like those stories that we craft, the first thing that we make, when we don't have a lot of information and we can fill in the blanks however we want, that can shape so many interactions. Like we can fill in the blanks on one thing and then carry that frame with us. Like you were saying, she could see that person trying to help multiple times in the future, all under the same frame. And then all of a sudden it's building this bigger story, this narrative of like,
right.
no, it's been like 6 months and this just keeps happening and this is ridiculous and I hate this guy. Yeah.
And this guy's like, why is she being so hostile toward me? And then obviously it just like escalates, because now it's something that started out of something small, just out of assumptions, could turn up into a bigger thing. And it could be like, just imagine you never actually getting to the source of the reality of the situation and just having that tense, hostile coworker environment for years. People could like let this go on for decades maybe, over like one tiny assumption from the start, and it just expanded beyond reason. Yeah.
That also makes me think of kind of how these types of conversations can get harder over time, in terms of if there is something that needs to be addressed and we don't end up addressing it, and we don't end up having these conversations, like we were saying with as like the story building, the actual problem can also build. Like I was just thinking with that example, it could easily turn into a scenario where it starts with one person trying to help another, feeling like they're being shown up. Then they act in a way that's like defensive or whatever else. And then the person who was originally trying to help gets those, negative vibes or like frustrations. Then it's like, what the hell is wrong with this person? And then they start acting in a way that's, negative or demeaning or whatever towards them. And like, then you have something that started and could have been, a quick, easy conversation of like, hey, I feel like, like I don't want to offend you, or like, I don't know what you're trying to do, but I feel like you're overstepping your bounds and like really trying to show me up all the time. I don't know if that's the case, or, there's a more tactful way to say that, but
that's a great way.
Like doing that super early would resolve all of the, possible buildup. And I think that's true across a number of different realms.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm just kind of thinking of, are there any other scenarios that you can think of where it might be a crucial conversations, whether it's like employee and an employer, or relationship, or it's like other situation that you think would be important to kind of touch on?
Yeah, this isn't a super important scenario to touch on, but it is a story
sure,
that I thought of to highlight that it's important to make the person that you're negotiating or speaking with feel valued. And that's so I was in Mexico like several years ago, and I don't speak much Spanish, but I can understand enough to kind of understand, I don't know, like 80% of conversations, right? Like I can kind of get what's going on.
Yeah.
So, we were out just like on vacation, obviously looking super touristy and negotiating for some stuff. And I wanted to buy, I think it was a ring. I believe it was a ring, and we were just talking and like kind of negotiating, trying to figure out a price. And then the guy switched to Spanish and was talking to someone else about the cost of the thing, but also being like really insulting about me, just assuming that like I didn't speak any Spanish or know anything. And he also happened to say what the item was at cost, right? Because it looked like some sort of like it was his boss or something type of deal. But anyway, I heard like how much the item was worth. And I was willing to actually pay quite a bit more than that before. But then after that, because part of me, sometimes when I shop for businesses, I'm like, I know that you need to make some amount of profit. So I'm like, I'm okay giving some amount of money to make a profit. Yeah. But then like after hearing all of that stuff, I basically was like, okay, cool. So I will pay you like 1 cent. I mean, not really, but basically like 1 cent more than this is worth. Final offer. You can sell it to me or not sell it to me. There's nothing you can say to change my mind.
Right.
And like, it all just goes back to like, had the conversation been different, had I felt valued, had I not known what was being said, and had I not heard like very rude things being said to me, I would have had no problem paying a lot more, right? Because like, as far as positions go, like I was okay giving up a position to like, oh, cool, here's an extra, I don't know, $20, like whatever you need to make a good profit. But after I didn't feel valued, I was just like, all right, I'm just gonna go to the very lowest possible thing that I can. Any amount of like, I don't want you to get any value out of this. I would like to just make this as terrible as possible for you. Not because I'm like generally, or because I started from a position of like, oh, I want to make it suck, but because I felt so unvalued. And I was like, cool, if you're not going to value me, and then I will do the same, which in retrospect, not like the most best thing I've ever done in my life. But at the same time, it was like, you obviously don't care, so I don't care.
Right, yeah. And I think that's really illustrates how a lot of people end up with these types of interactions. If you don't feel valued, then you're not going to act respectful and treat the other person a value back. And it's like, if you want to feel a value, then you have to also give it too. And if it wasn't like reciprocated, then it makes sense. Yeah.
And I feel like that's how many negotiations break down, is there is no remembrance of the shared goal, right? Because like we had a shared purpose of like exchanging an item.
Yeah.
Like he wanted to sell it to get some money. I was happy to pay for it to trade. Yeah. But it quickly moved away from that and into this like, oh, no respect? Cool, no respect. And I think it's really easy if you're not aware of any of these tools, or like this is stuff you never think about, to drop really quickly out of this like, here's what we're trying to do, to like this honor type of thing of like, I'm going to get this because this is the best thing for me. And I want it just to say that I was able to get it over you.
Right. Yeah. And subsequently, it's like neither of you really kind of walked away with winning. Like you didn't get the sale and you didn't get the ring. And it's just like, had he been more respectful, or just not like talk behind your back, but technically in front of you, not realizing, then you probably willing to pay like double what the actual cost could have been. And it does make a difference. And it's like, you know, when I think about, I just thought of like the other situation, another story from the book that they used of like the two daughters. They're like at Disneyland or some theme park, and the daughters get back to the hotel room and they're like fighting to go use the bathroom. And the dad's like, well, you got to work it out yourself. Like, I'm not going to resolve this for you. You got to work it out yourself. So they're like in the bathroom arguing for like 15, 20 minutes of who gets to use it first. And then eventually there's a flush, and then eventually there's another flush, and then they walk out. And the dad's like, you know, you could have like both peed in the amount of time that it took you to like work out who would pee first, kind of a thing. And it was just like, you know, if we both thought about like the goal is that we get to pee instead of like being in an argument for like 20 minutes about who gets to go first, then really you have to kind of step back and really see what do I really want? And for both those girls, they wanted to pee. And it's just like, but at the same time, they were stuck in like, I deserve to pee first because you always get to pee first and you always get like things your way. And that's not fair. And like all of that situation.
Well, I do think that touches on another point that has been important for me at least, which is a lot of times these negotiations are like trying to figure things out. Don't need to hinge on what feels fair. Like a lot of times this idea has come into my mind in the past of like, oh, like this outcome is fine and that outcome is fine, but doesn't feel fair, so I don't want it. And it's just like, I don't know, historically I've like clung to this idea of fairness when it didn't actually serve my interest. I don't know how common that is, but I have seen, you know, like kids argue like in the same way about something for a very long time about like, it's not fair. And it's like, okay, it doesn't like, fairness is a fine value, but not every situation is going to result in something that's fair. That's just the way that things work. So I don't know if it's tripped anyone else up as much as it has me, but I have definitely clung to the idea of fairness and tried to get something that was not a viable solution, like something that the other person would never agree to just because I thought it was fair.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like I've had those moments, and I see, like, I have a almost 5-year-old niece and a 3-year-old nephew, and they're at the perfect age of, like, if he has it, I need it too. It's not fair. He has a bigger portion. It's just like that. It's like, I see it all the time, and it's like, it has to be, you have to give them the exact same amount, not like a little crumb more. It's just like, it's not fair otherwise, and they will, like, drag it out. And I was just trying to think of how that relates to my own adult life. And a scenario that I think of is in my relationship. I feel like I'm generally the cleaner one, and I'm always, like, cleaning up after things. It's like, if we're at his house, then I'm doing dishes and cleaning up and trying to keep the space cleaner. But then when I'm at my house, I'm still doing that. Like, for us. And it's just like, that doesn't seem fair. Like, I am always the one, like, cleaning up more of the time compared to him. But, you know, not from Crucial Conversations book, but actually a different book, Loving What Is, which is a really amazing book. That kind of helped me kind of get over it. It's like, if the mess bothers me and it doesn't bother him, then it's just like, instead of suffering over how he doesn't pick up and clean up after himself as much or as quickly as I do, or I could just, like, clean it up myself. It doesn't take that long, and then I don't have to be stressed out or upset about it. And so I usually choose that, and just being like, you know, he is who he is, and, you know, I can't necessarily get him to clean up more frequently, or he likes to leave dishes in the sink longer than I do. So it's just kind of accepting what is, and knowing that, you know, maybe it isn't fair who cleans up more, but it's like, my value of cleanliness is more than his. So I just realized, you know, it matters more to me. It doesn't matter as much to him. So I need to be like, what do I really want is a clean space, and I'm capable of cleaning up the space. So it doesn't seem fair, but I'll do it because it matters more to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think based on what, like in your example, the thing that I've seen in the past that would be like the absolute wrong path that happens all the time is, like, you feel that way and then come at it like, okay, now you have to clean the place. Like, I've been doing it, now you have to do it. Right. And, like, that, just because it's fair. And, like, there is another path. I mean, obviously what you've laid out is a path that's working. There's also another path of, like, okay, I feel like, you know, I'm doing a lot of cleaning. I would like some help in some of the cleaning. Is there a way? Is there something that we can work out? Is there something that you're open to? Is this, you know, like, there's another path that is like this collaborative, like, is there somewhere we can come to the middle on this? Or, like you were saying, there's this other path of, like, I can just kind of change my expectations and do things a little bit differently. But the path that, like, really doesn't work, that I see a lot, is this forceful, like, right, this is what's fair. It's your turn to do all the shit. Like, I'm done. I already did it.
I just did the dishes. I just took out the trash. It's your turn. And then it's just like, oh, I'll just let it pile up because it's his turn. And then it's annoying me because he won't. And then, yeah. So that is another good point of just being also communicating. Like, I see things and I will just do it without being asked. He needs to be asked. Like, it's not that he won't do it. It's like, I have to, like, tell him to do it. And then I have to realize maybe it might take a day or two for him to do it. And I have to be okay with him doing that. But he will, like, usually do it if I request it. But it's just like him not being so mindful of things that I would, like, notice. Like, oh yeah, the trash is overflowing. When I notice that, I take it out instead of, like, waiting for someone else to take it out. It just doesn't magically disappear. Like, it's just, yeah. So there's that.
Yeah, and I think that's really the way to go. It's just, like, figure out some other path. Like, just coming with that, like, ultimatum. Just, you know, it goes back to, like, the positioning argument stuff of, like, now in this position, you have to start doing this stuff, and it just doesn't really work ever. And even if it does, even if the outcome works, the relationship suffers. Like, you feel some effects from that. So it's not really something that you want to use very often, especially for relationships you actually care about.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I had to give up a lot of like the fairness of, and he does like contribute to the relationship in other ways. And yes, we have different levels of cleanliness, and it is kind of, I've started also to kind of loosen up on my standards of being like, before I'm like, no dishes in the sink ever. It's like, put it in. Why is it that hard to freaking put it in the dishwasher? And he has this whole thing of like, sometimes they need to soak. Just like, and I'm like, do they need to soak for like 3 days? So there's like this whole, I think this is like a common couples argument when you live together of, yeah, and just being like, okay, now I do agree, like sometimes it does need to soak a little bit, but I only like give myself a day at most to do that. And if he doesn't do it, then I'm just gonna do it because it's the one that I'm the one being bothered by it. Yeah.
And I think you touched on something important in terms of, you were saying, contribution to the relationship, right? Like what matters is finding a set of shared responsibilities that fits for both people. Like that's one thing that I found really useful is both in my relationship, but also when I was living with my parents and my siblings, is like some chores suck more for certain people than other people.
Right, yeah.
And sometimes there are ways, and not always, sometimes both people hate taking out the trash or doing the dishes or whatever, and then that sucks and you just have to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I found that there are times when things are being distributed in a way that's fair, but doesn't actually make sense for what people want to do. Like vacuuming, for example, I don't mind at all. I can't remember who hates it. Someone that I know that I've lived with in the past really hates it. And I'm not a super fan of doing dishes. So like we had worked out a way that we could both contribute to these separate things instead of splitting them both down the middle.
Right, equally.
And both of us were happier that way. And we both felt like, okay, we have this shared outcome. We have this shared goal. And again, I mean, I've said it like a bajillion times, but it just gets you away from that position of like, we have to do what's fair to like, actually, this is a way better setup. It's not fair, really, because I don't know, like fair would be half for both.
Right.
But it is better.
Right. Yeah, and it's that way you both get to do the chore that you prefer over the chore that you don't. And in a way, is it 50-50, like he's doing the dishes 50% of the times, or you're doing vacuuming 50% of the time. And it's like, yeah, you can do it that way to make it fair, but then both of you are suffering half of the time. So it's like, are you winning with that by splitting it down the middle to make it fair? Right. Yeah. Like it sounds like the result you ended up with is more of a win because you don't end up having to vacuum the thing that you don't like. So that I'd say that's a win.
And it just goes back to that third path thing, right? Like when I still can't remember who it was. I wish I knew who it was. But when we first had that conversation, that's what we came to. Is like, I guess we both just do half of the thing because that's
that's kind of how people do it.
That's where you start. The alternative is like you do all of it or I do all of it. That's way worse. Like this very binary black and white, like,
yeah,
I don't know, these are the only three options. Either like we share it, you do all of it, or I do all of it. When really there's almost always this third path. And it reminds me of, there was an apartment that I moved into, and I'm trying to remember the details as I tell the story, but basically, I know what it was. So the place had just been built. It was brand new, and I was the first person to move in and live there. And the landlord, as I was talking to her, she was a little bit worried about the place being clean. And, she brought it up a couple times, not like explicitly saying anything, but she's like, oh, it's brand new and I really want to make sure things stay nice and yada, yada, yada. And then, so we were kind of negotiating and figuring out the rent and some of the details and like utilities and stuff like that. And it came out with a price that wasn't exactly what I wanted. It was a little bit high for me. And I was like, man, this place is pretty good, but I don't think I can pay that much. So maybe I'll just look for something else. And then after thinking about it for a while, after getting myself out of the position to more of this like value-based stuff, I realized like, oh, she said like 5 times that she wants to keep the place clean.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to call her and ask if she'll lower the rent if I promise to hire cleaners every month.
Oh, yeah.
And like, if she doesn't want it, cool.
Yeah.
That's totally fine. But, you know, that makes sense to me. Like, I get what I want, like, is a little bit lower rent.
Right.
She gets something that I know she wants because I heard her say it. Like,
a lot of times.
Place will definitely be clean if cleaners do it. If I do it, there are no promises. I'll do my best, which is not very good. But that worked out. You know, like I was able to have that conversation with her. Now she knows that I value her place, what she cares about, right? Like that was not part of our conversation as far as actually negotiating and figuring out the place. That was just offhand in some other conversation. Mm-hmm. So she knows that I care about her outcomes.
Right.
And then I was able to find a place that was better for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one of like the main examples of a time that I explicitly sat down and was like, okay, hold on. What is the third path here? Like, what can I figure out? Because this place is really awesome. It's just a little more than I want to pay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good example of, you know, looking for that third path. And actually that's a great idea in itself for couples that are fighting about who's cleaning more and the fairness of that. You could just hire a third party to handle it for you, and then nobody has to do the thing they don't want. It's like, I don't think either of us likes cleaning the bathroom. So just like make someone else do it if it really is an issue, instead of like really have it be an ongoing, because I could see that being an issue for couples for years and years, and could be even like a breaking point of relationships over like who did what and who didn't do what. And it's just like, you could just hire someone. I mean, yeah, it's money, but if it saves your marriage, might be worth it. Yeah.
And that's how it always is. There's always more options. Like, I feel like it's so easy and common and natural to just be like, it's this or this, and I'm stuck. Like, this has these pros and cons. This has these pros and cons. Like, what am I going to pick? Right. But there's always, like, you know, it's not like me or you do it, or we split it 50-50, or each of us takes one. Like you said, like, or we just get someone else to do it. Okay, it costs money. And then, like, how do we value money? How much money do we need? Where does money fit in? You know what I mean? And you can just keep these variables just keep getting mixed in. And like, you can always find something better. Not always, but almost always find something better than what you start with. Right. Like, there's almost always the initial idea, and it's like, oh, wow, okay, here's the pros and cons. And then if you just keep tweaking and messing around with the variables and playing with stuff, you can almost always find something better. And I've found both pros and cons from it in terms of a lot of times I'm getting better outcomes, but now I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many options for everything. Like, how do I pick? There's so many different ways to solve this problem. Yeah. But it's a good problem to have. It's better than feeling trapped and like, there's only 2 ways to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people do is like, there's only 2 options and nothing else. They have their opinion and their solution for the problem, and they think that's the only right way to do it. And then they're not conversing with that other person because they're like, well, my position or my way is obviously the right way. So it's just like, there's no other solution. But if you actually engage in the conversation with the person you're having whatever conflict about or trying to come to a resolve, then, you know, together you can create endless possibilities, endless solutions, and just like brainstorm. You know, maybe not all of them will work, but it's like, what would have it, like, could you actually come to a place of agreeing on some sort of path, whether that's, you know, getting a cleaner together, or would you rather just have like the same argument over and over and over again? And then that's the definition of insanity. It's like when you try to solve a problem in the same way and you keep getting the same outcome, you got to try something different. Just like, you got to try something different. And there are, if you're willing to expand your mind and realize there are a million solutions to all sorts of different problems, that doesn't have to be one way or the highway, that it really can open up a lot for relationships and conversations in general.
All right. One other thing, I'm going to switch the topic a little bit, but one other thing I wanted to touch on is practicing some of this stuff I think there's a very easy path to do it in terms of, and I think I've talked about this before, but taking lower stakes conversations and injecting some of these skills and strategies and ideas of like, okay, how do we move towards more of a middle on this thing? How do we figure this out? And building those really gives you a baseline to use in the more important conversations. So I think like choosing a restaurant, for example, like something very low stakes, but being intentional
that
about
can turn into a big conflict. Yeah.
Being intentional about using some of the tools and some of the ideas in those situations where, for the most part, it's pretty safe and pretty mellow, gives you a lot more confidence and a lot more of an ability to navigate some of the stuff that really gives people a lot of anxiety and seems pretty tough.
Yeah, definitely. I just, when you thought of the restaurant thing, I just thought of like how in my relationship, we're like, oh, you picked the restaurant last time, I get to pick now. And like that back to the fairness thing in my head of just like, that's not fair. You had to pick last time. You always pick Italian food. I want something different kind of a thing. And I'm just like, man, now I have to step back the next time we come to a place of like, who gets to pick the restaurant and the type of food? Okay, how are we both going to win? What was something we would both enjoy right now? Which we do sometimes, but sometimes I feel like we eat too much Italian food. Yeah.
There's got to be some third path. I don't know what it is, but it's out there.
Third path. Yeah. Anyways, I think we covered the topic pretty well. Was there anything else that you had wanted to share?
Nope. I mean, I don't even know what's in the book and what's not in the book. So I just did my best to remember.
Like it's all important stuff. So right. All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.
You can check out more content at howtohappy.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date on the videos. We've also got a Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook that you can check out. See you next time.